So welcome everyone. I hope folks aren't getting too zoomed out at this point. Who knew it would last, that we'd be doing this long, this kind of practice. So again, thanks for showing up for this meditation together in this talk and dialogue. So the talk is on the 5 hindrances, which are the obstacles or difficulties that come up in our practice. Primarily, our meditation practice is the way it's traditionally talked about. I might expand it so that it includes kind of how we practice all the time in our lives, as well as our meditation. Because as you know, I always talk about our every moment as being a meditation, part of our meditation. I'm also going to talk about it a little different way. So I'm going to cover kind of 3 things. That difficulties are not a problem, that they are the path. And our practice is to investigate them. So difficulties are not a problem. I'll talk about that. That we make difficulties the object of our meditation when they arise. So I'll also talk about how we do that, how we make these difficulties, or what we call difficulties or obstacles, the object of our attention. So we bring attention to that difficulty as it's arising. And the third thing is, if it's overwhelming in some way, and or persistent and insistent in some way, that we can look at different ways of engaging with the difficulties. In a sense, we can re-engage the meditator to then relate to these to the difficulty that's arising. So those are the 3 things. I will talk about what the 5 hindrances are, but perhaps in a different way. The one thing that the Buddha did when he taught was he taught to his audience. So if he was, teaching people that were fairly new to the practice, he was talking about difficulties, he would give more kind of advice on how that person could relate to the difficulty or overcome it, a remedy in a sense. And if it's a person who has been practicing much longer, then the teaching is more about just being with things as they are, like the Bahia teaching. In the seeing, there's just the seeing, and the cognizing, there's just the cognizing. I mean, and so on through all the senses. And if you train in this way, you'll neither be here nor there or anywhere in between. So that's a quite a different teaching than some of the other teachings you might come across. So they kind of span a spectrum, and I'm going to try to cover that spectrum. So I'll give you some remedies on how to address the difficulties, but I'll also talk about, really just being with things as they are. But first off, the first one is difficulties are not the problem. They are the path. So you could look at difficulties as an opportunity in a way to practice, to investigate, to learn. Excuse me. If a difficulty is arising, there's something there that we can understand, and we can no. So rather than trying to get rid of the difficulty, we use it. It's kind of grist for the mill, so to speak. An opportunity to practice. So I just reflect for a moment. Is that how you relate to what you might call a difficulty in your practice? So if the mind gets really restless, for example, is that how you approach it? Here's an opportunity to investigate, to really use this to see deeply. Or is it more like, oh, geez, I wish this mind would calm down so that I can get back to my meditation? So just reflect on that. If what arises is judgment, then you investigate that, right? That's also part of the practice. One statement, and I can't remember where I heard this. You hear these kind of Dharma statements, and they just kind of stick in your mind. One was, and it might have been Sayadaw Tanjin who said this, because I listened to quite a few of his talks, via translator. No one has ever attained awakening during the course of an easy, comfortable life. Sounds like something as well that he would that he might say. In fact, you might not even come to this practice if life was very easy and always comfortable. I'm going to read and I've read this before in this group. It's one of my favorite little stories. Once a farmer went to tell the Buddha about his problems. He described his difficulties farming, how either droughts or monsoons complicated his work. He told the Buddha about his wife, how even though he loved her, there were certain things about her he wanted to change. Likewise with his children. Yes, he loved them, but they weren't turning out quite the way he wanted. When he was finished, he asked the Buddha if he could help him with his troubles. The Buddha said, "I'm sorry, but I can't help you." "What do you mean?" said the farmer. "You're supposed to be a great teacher." The Buddha replied, "Sir, it is like this. All human beings have 83 problems. It's a fact of life. Sure, a few problems may go away now and then, but soon enough others will arise, so you will always have 83 problems." The farmer responded indignantly, "Then what's the good of all your teaching?" The Buddha replied, "My teaching can't help you with the 83 problems, but perhaps it can help you with the 84th problem." "What's that?" said the farmer. "The 84th problem is that we don't want to have any problems." So although we may not realize that we have this deep-seated belief that if we practice long and hard enough, that our problems will go away. But that's part of why we practice. And hidden, perhaps beneath that even, is that we shouldn't have problems. We shouldn't have pain. Meister Eckhart, the 3rd century Christian mystic, he declared that if the only prayer you say in your life is "thank you," that will suffice. So whatever arises, the prayer is "thank you." And we also, in this group, explored the Lojong teachings. And one of the contemplations was transform adversity into the path of awakening. And it says the same thing. Moving through life with a sense of gratitude towards everyone, everything, including people you find disagreeable in situations. And that will suffice. So basically, whatever happens, good, bad, we make it part of the path. There's no mistakes. You're not lost in your practice. It's not something that shouldn't be happening. You're not lazy. You're not distracted. There's no mistakes. That's just what the mind thinks. It's not what's actually happening. So once you begin to practice in this way, no matter what comes up in your meditation or what comes up in your life, it's practice. It's mindfulness practice or spiritual practice, however you might be approaching it. No matter what comes up. So if anger comes up, you acknowledge and recognize that anger is present. You can let go of any strategies that might arise regarding the anger, like blame or rationalization or whatever it might be, letting go of those usual strategies. You could then label the thought that's behind the emotion. There is a believed thought that, and then you can come to the body and feel how the anger is manifesting in the body. For an example, I think it was one of the first retreats, insight meditation retreats I went on many years ago. And if you've been to one of these insight meditation retreats, you sit in meditation and then you do walking meditation. And you kind of go back and forth between these. Sit, walk, eat, as I call it. Sit, walk, eat. You do sit, walk, then eat, and then sleep. And that's pretty much the schedule. They have it all mapped out with times, but that's the schedule. Sit, walk. And so you're doing the walking meditation, and you do it in these lanes. You're told to, maybe walk 10 feet, turn around and walk back. So you walk back and forth, usually slowly in this lane, walking meditation, sensing into the sensation in the body of walking and so on, or whatever instructions they're giving you for that day. So I had this lane that I'd kind of nicely settled into at the retreat center, and that was my lane. And so that's how I kind of looked. I enjoyed this lane. I enjoyed the birds that were there. I enjoyed everything about it, the length of the grass, everything about this lane. And I came out after one sitting, and there was somebody walking in my lane. And I'm on a silent retreat, de-stressing and just being with things, and anger, just fairly intense anger, just came right up. And of course, this shouldn't be happening. This person, what's the matter with them? Why? They should have seen me in this lane for the last 4 or 5 days. What are they doing, in this lane? And, so blame. Maybe I should go. I can't say anything because it's a silent retreat. So maybe I nudge them out of the way. All these, kinds of thoughts. I let go of all those justifications that arose, and then just kind of thought, there's a believed thought that this person shouldn't be in this lane. So I labeled the thought, there's a believed thought that this person shouldn't be in this lane. So I could identify quite clearly the thought that was behind the anger. And of course, that soon as you label a thought in that way, it does two things. It disidentifies you from the thought. So it's just a thought. It's a believed thought. I labeled it as a believed thought because if it's just a thought, it has no impact. It arises and passes away. It's only if it's a believed thought that it can cause an emotional reaction. So it's a little different than just thought labeling, where you go planning, fantasizing, worrying, where you just label thoughts. This is a believed thought that caused an emotional reaction. So I actually said it as a believed thought that this person shouldn't be in my lane. Noticed it loosen a little bit, and then I went and investigated how that anger felt in the body, very concretely, the contractions in the body. So you could kind of look at it in those as kind of a 4-step process: acknowledging the difficulty, acknowledging the anger, letting go of the usual strategies of dealing with it, labeling the believed thoughts behind it, and then feeling it concretely, which usually means feeling it in the body. So then we start to see that everything is kind of workable and teachable in this practice. Even the most intense of the hindrances, something like anger, is workable. And the stuff that comes up in our practices, difficulties, is kind of what's unresolved in our lives as well. So we can really start to see, as my teacher Matthew Flickstein used to say, our incompletions. What's unresolved. So that's the first one. Difficulties are the path. They're not a problem that we need to get rid of. In fact, that's just aversion, which is one of the 5 hindrances. So facing things as they are. And there's a lot of resistance to that, right? There's a lot of resistance. We have a lot of resistance to facing things as they are. Because to face things as they are, we have to abandon how we think they should be. That's hard to do. We have to really abandon this idea of how things should be. So I had to abandon the idea that this person shouldn't be in my lane. And there's so many things like that come up in our daily lives, where we to face things as they are. We have to abandon how things should be. So the sort of one practice pointer I would give for facing difficulties is making the difficulty or the hindrance the object of attention, or the object of a meditation. So whatever that difficulty is, that becomes, so you could be following the breath, and then restless mind comes up. The mind's just churning out thoughts. So oftentimes the practice is, you come back to the breath, you let go of the thought, you notice that you're lost in thought, you come back to the breath. Now, another way to practice this is just bring attention to the thought process itself. Notice that the mind is thinking. There's the mind thinking. Not getting lost in the thinking, but noticing that the mind is just churning out all these thoughts. You could even label them. There's planning thoughts, worrying thoughts, not planning thoughts again, the boss story. So that helps disidentify from the thoughts, loosens our identification with them as them being personal, starting to just see them as a process of thoughts arising. So we're making the difficulty the object of our meditation. So how can we welcome what are often seen as unwelcome visitors? We often see these as unwelcome visitors, and so the invitation is to welcome them, as the guest house, as Rumi's guest house poem so eloquently states. Welcome them all. So it's important that we don't try to get rid of them. The point is to understand them and to allow them to release. To see them, understand them, allow them to release. So we're bringing an attitude of interest, of curiosity, of listening to the practice. I did a guided meditation with Adjas this morning called The Art of Listening. And he pointed out through the guiding that meditation is just listening. Just listening to what's arising. He used listening in quite an interesting way. Just being available and receptive to whatever's presenting in our practice and in our daily lives. It's not just meditation. And he called it an art because there's not like a science to it. There's no formula. It's you kind of feel your way into it, which is very much Adja's approach to practice. When I do retreats, you do the individual interviews or sometimes group interviews. People come and talk about what's happening in their practice, and many people say that sadness is arising, it's getting in the way of my practice, or anger is arising, and it's making it hard to practice. All these kinds of, my mind is really active and it's making it hard to meditate. And all of these have this kind of undertone that there's something wrong, that's getting in the way of practice. And how do I get rid of it? And sometimes I'll offer some advice depending on how long the person's been practicing, because restless mind can be kind of grueling on a 7-day retreat if it just keeps coming. So there are, and I'll talk about this in the third point, some ways to address it, particularly if you're newer to the practice. But the general approach is just bring curiosity and interest to it. So this is my default in the practice. And you've probably, if you've been coming to these sessions with me for a while, you get the gist of how I approach meditation is that, you're not meditating. Meditating's just happening. And we're resting in awareness and really letting go of this idea that you're a meditator that's, controlling doing all this stuff and bringing all this technique to bear. It's kind of letting go of technique and really just allowing the stillness and silence that's already inherent, ever present, to be seen. So that's how I approach this practice. So you can see how I come at the 5 hindrances in this kind of way of it's not a problem. No problem. It's to be seen and understood. So seeing bringing the attitude of interest and curiosity and wanting to see is the attitude I would bring to the difficulties or hindrance. So with this kind of shift in attitude, there's also there's a reactivity also shifts. We're less reactive to what's arising. And even if reactivity arises, we can be non-reactive to seeing reactivity. So we're really just bringing this mirror of mindfulness to whatever's arising and just letting reflect back what is there. The mountain meditation that we did has that tone to it. Just you're solid, grounded, grounded, rooted in the earth. Whatever passes, it's just allowed. It's not a problem. If a storm passes, it's a storm. It's just a storm passing. Whether it's clouds, doesn't matter what people think of the mountain. What weather patterns flow past the mountain remains unmoved and steady. So that's why I offered that guided meditation. That's the kind of way to be with this. So I want to talk a bit about this labeling. I've mentioned it, and it's if you take kind of one thing away from this talk, this might be the one thing to take away is what labeling is and how you might use it in your practice. There's, of course, neuroscience evidence that it decreases activity in the amygdala and increases activity in the prefrontal cortex. Richie Davidson's doing some research in that regard, looking at the impact of labeling in our brains. So what the practice is, when the mind is, when thoughts arise, so there's two types of labeling. One is where you just notice planning. So it's kind of a general type of labeling, planning, worrying, and so on. Just kind of general. It just that's kind of a light touch of just saying, there it is. It doesn't matter even what the label is. It's usually just one word. You just touch it, and this helps us know that we're thinking. So it makes us recognize that the mind is thinking and what it's thinking. It's thinking, planning, or so on. The other is to identify the specific thought. And I do this particularly if it's an emotional, it's thoughts that are feeding an emotion. So anger, boredom, impatience, so on, the variety of emotions. You identify the believed thought that's feeding that emotion. And just say it as a believed thought that person shouldn't be walking in my lane. A believed thought that I shouldn't be waiting in this lineup. Whatever the believed thought is, the believed thought that, what's a good one for boredom? What's a good thought the believed thought that something more exciting should be happening in this moment? Whatever it might be, just identifying that believed thought. So those are kind of the two types of labeling, general labeling and a specific labeling. And play around with that during the week and see how that shifts your relationship to thoughts. Because thoughts are so much behind these difficulties, right? The relationship to thoughts is so key in the arising of these difficulties. So really understanding that our relationship to the thoughts that arise is so key. the other thing that can happen, and I don't know, has anybody ever had the experience where it sometimes happens when you're trying to sleep and the mind's just thinking? Has anybody had that experience? You know what I mean? Like, and it's not really thinking about anything. I actually woke up not too long ago. I was dreaming. Oh, what was it? I was dreaming about a car rental that something went wrong with it. And it didn't actually happen. It was literally in a dream. And I woke up, the dream woke me up, I guess. I woke up and the mind wouldn't stop spinning about this car rental problem. Just kept thinking about it. And, it was still a little fresh. I can barely remember it now, but it was very fresh in the moment. And the mind wouldn't, just kept churning up this thoughts about a car rental problem that never happened. And all I could do is kind of sit back and watch the show. Like, what is this? Like, you do know this didn't happen, right? There's no car rental. And so on. And I think, so when I had that happen, not that necessarily that example, but just lying there and then the mind's just churning out thoughts about whatever. It's not really worrying. It's not really doing anything. It's just thinking. Is a believed thought that the mind needs to control. There's a believed thought that the mind needs to control. The mind is resisting chaos. The mind wants control. And it's just flipping and flipping and flipping, trying to find some ground of control. So it's a believed thought that the mind wants control. And just holding that and seeing what happens. So I did that with my dream, but control of, to talk about the mind wanting control of a dream. Well, if you take the non-dual teachings to heart, this is all a dream, right? So that's all the mind does is conjure up thoughts about the dream. This was just an actual dream. So that's kind of another way that you can relate to thoughts and use this labeling to relate to what's arising. I'm going to skip over this bit here. There's so many acronyms that are out in the mindfulness circles now. Tara Brach has RAIN, recognize, investigate, not identify, bring compassion, accept, I think is maybe the A, and there's stop that comes from MBSR, which is stop, take a breath, observe, proceed. There's all these, and you can kind of Google some of these. RAIN and stop are two that the 3-minute breathing space is another one you can Google, research, and find out about if you're interested in some of these kind of more formulaic ways of dealing with what's arising in our experience. They basically all do what I'm discussing here. It's acknowledging what's arising, labeling in some way, feeling in the body, investigating, and bringing self-compassion. If you can kind of think of those, I don't have an acronym, it's like Albius or something, but acknowledge, label, body, investigate, self-compassion. If anybody can think of a fancy acronym for that. But I think that captures all the aspects: acknowledge and accept that it's present, label, especially labeling the thought, feeling it concretely, which really goes experiencing it in the body, investigating what's behind it, what are the stories, the thoughts feeding it, and then bring self-compassion to it. So working skillfully with difficulties in this way, such a key part of the practice. There's for people that like books, there's a book I read in the 90s at some point, and I'll never forget Jack Kornfield's book. I think it's called A Path with Heart. People know that book? Jack Kornfield. Is that the right title? Yeah, Path with Heart. Yeah. And chapter 8 it blew my mind when I read it. It just so succinctly puts, how we deal with, he called them insistent visitors. How we face difficulties. Not trying to solve or figure them out, but to really acknowledge them and ask the question, what wants acceptance? And we're not trying to answer that question. You just basically ask, what wants acceptance here? Then you just wait. What wants acceptance? Underneath that is something that wants acceptance. We can ask these kinds of we can bring these inquiries to our practice. So again, you don't try to answer the question, you just ask the question. And you kind of offer it into the space of stillness, and then you wait. Okay, now the last bit I said I'd talk about is how to deal with bring some remedies. So everything I've said up until now, you're not really engaging the meditator. So if you know what I mentioned this to Vida, and she goes, nobody's going to understand what you mean by that. But I think you folks have been doing this, so you know what I mean by not engaging the meditator. You're just allowing things to be as they are. Meditation is just happening. It's just unfolding. There's no meditator. There's no one meditating. It's non-meditation, resting in awareness. This last little bit is where you engage the meditator. And you can do that. You can consciously engage the meditator. Things are getting so difficult. Just being with things as they are is overwhelming me. I just can't do it in this moment. I'm going to re-engage the meditator, and I'm going to deal with it in a different way. And you're not, so it's a little different than aversion, because with aversion, you're saying, I want to get rid of it. Here you're saying, I'm putting it aside for another day. Right now, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to count breaths. I'm going to do loving kindness meditation. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to put this difficulty aside for another day. So it's not aversion where I want to get rid of it. I'm going to count breaths to stop the mind. It's like, the mind is just churning here. I've been with it. I'm going to put it aside for now, and I'm going to count breaths. You count each in-breath and out-breath. You count 1. In-breath, out-breath, you count 2. You go up to 10. If you get lost in thought, you start over at 1. You can go up to 10, then 9, then 8, then 7, then 6, right? And you just go through that process and see what happens when you've counted that many breaths. And that's actually in the 5 hindrances, the remedy that is given for a restless mind is counting breaths is often the remedy given for a restless mind. Now, I would only engage that if it's overwhelming. I would default to allowing it to be first. Only engage the meditator if it's overwhelming. Only start doing these kind of remedies if it's overwhelming. Loving kindness meditation is often recommended for the second hindrance, which is ill will. or aversion. I'm going to put this aside. This anger is so intense. I let go of my strategies. I looked at the belief thoughts. It's overwhelming. I'm getting a headache or whatever it might be. I'm going to put it aside for now, and I'm going to do a loving kindness meditation or self-compassion meditation. One that Jack Kornfield gave, and this is going to sound, it's very simple, but it was kind of a game changer for me in a way, is transform the energy. So you put it aside and you transform the energy. Go for a run. So an emotional state can have a lot of energy. Go for a run, chop wood, cut the lawn, vacuum the house. I don't know, whatever takes some energy and takes you, into a different set of moments. And I would do that. I would go for a run. And that would be enough to kind of transform the energy. Then the next time it came up, I'd say, well, there's something here that's really got juice, what's asking for acceptance, what needs to be investigated here. So I could come back to it at another time. Yeah. I haven't even said what the hindrances are at this point. Sense desire, ill will or aversion. This is the second one. So the first two are, grasping and pushing away, wanting and not wanting. And the second two are more mind states, sleepiness and sloth and torpor, or sloth and torpor as it's called, one's being mental and one being a physical sleepiness. And that one, I had a friend who every time he meditated, he fell asleep. And so I said, well, stand up when you meditate and see what happens. And that worked, because he said he would start to fall asleep and he'd start to fall over. So his mind kind of realized that this could be dangerous, this falling over, so I'll just stay awake. So that's the third one, is sleepiness. The fourth is the restless mind. And we talked about so many ways and how we can relate to that, from thought labeling and down to counting breaths. And the fifth is doubt. Why am I doing this? Is this anything going to result from all this? That's a trickier one, and that's often the last one to leave, to be purified, so to speak. Listening to talks, talking to a teacher, or reading books are some of the ways to relate to doubt that's engaging the meditator. The other way is just to sit with it. It's just a thought. Why am I doing this? There's a believed thought there somewhere that's causing doubt. So I'll open it up for any comments and questions. I went on for a little longer than my 35 minutes, but there's so much to cover in this area.
So I just want to thank you for this, Stephen, that more than a lot of them recently, this one really resonates, just for whatever reason, or whatever was arising, it resonated. And just, I would say what really hit me and is seems to be very helpful is this idea of believed thoughts. So, and really investigating that, because if something happens and my believed thought is this and my reaction is that, well, the person beside me could have a completely different thought and a completely different reaction. It comes back to, I suppose, perception is reality. But but it's relating it to, I guess, our emotional response to things, and what's behind it. That's very helpful. It seems to me, and it's gonna be helpful for me. So thank you.
I found with when one engages the meditator, the phrase "not now, Mara" works really well for me. So, yeah, it's a nice little tidbit, I think.
This discussion also really resonated with me because actually it made me think of something a couple of years ago, after I've been through a difficult period, and I had been on a leave of absence for a couple of months from work. I remember when I started feeling better, and I was looking at contemplating going back to work, and I had mentioned that to the psychologist that I was seeing. And so when the day I told her, you know what, I think I'm ready, like I'm ready to go back. And she said to me, wow, that's wonderful, because think about it, Anik, like it's going to be like a laboratory for you, like you're going to learn so much, think about all the possibilities, like all those things that were happened in the past and that might arise, and now that you have new tools and new you've shifted some ways of seeing things, like you have the possibility of learning so much. And first I was like, okay, yes, maybe, but maybe I don't want it to be a laboratory, maybe I want things to be very simple for me. But anyways, like of course it's stuck in my head. And I remember when I went back to work and I was in meetings or situations where emotions were emerging. And I remember thinking, hey, what can I learn from this? What's happening here? And how can I just let it go? And anyways, and it truly worked for me. It changed me. I kept thinking, hey, what can I learn? How can this be positive? And to me, what you were saying, it's similar. Like when I'm meditating or letting stillness and silence arising, and there's something coming a thought coming, or something that tries to get my attention, I sometimes, not always, just try to accept it and see what I can learn from it. So anyways, so thank you.
Yeah, in a very similar, meditation is very similar in that sense to sessions with a psychologist, because we're seeing things in our, how we relate to things in our meditation that then we can take into the world. Right? We're seeing what's calling for acceptance. We're seeing how we can relate to thoughts in a different way, right? Because we've done it in our meditation. We've seen that we can just allow a thought to be a thought. It doesn't need to be a believed thought, and we can take that into our daily lives. We can see how we can relate to a difficulty that arises in our meditation in new ways, that then we can relate to difficulties. This is where things get serious in our daily, in our real life. This is where, it's usually bigger and it's got more juice to it and more buttons have been pushed. There's usually people involved. You're not just sitting on a chair with your eyes closed. There's lots of stuff there. So that's all meditation really is practice for daily life. There's no other reason to meditate except to deeply see and so that you can then take that knowing into daily life and live life from that place of knowing. Yeah. And at another level, learn how to respond rather than react to what arises, to kind of put it into mindfulness terms. Well, I think we can leave it there. The silence is nice. A teacher I had in India, Bhagavan Shanmukti, said that if after a talk there's silence, it's a good sign, because it means people are absorbing it in their being and not caught in their minds. So I appreciate the silence. Maybe I perhaps touched your being with that, the way to relate to difficulties from a place of being rather than doing or thinking. So enjoy the week, everyone. I don't know what the talk next week will be. I think if we go back to the 7 factors of awakening, it would be equanimity. we'll see what comes up. If anybody has any suggestions, I'm open to suggestions about, what's coming up in your lives as you engage with this practice. Let me know. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.